Oh, I can see Vygotsky's unfinished symphony with an image of what looks to me like the Pilbara up north of Australia.
Pilbara. Oh, yes. Okay, great. Okay, that's Nikolai. This is my metaphor. This is the metaphor I want to start with. I'm not sure it's a good metaphor. I'm sort of, so I was sort of discussing with Nikolai the same way I was discussing with my wife. Where's the starting point of a good presentation? How do you begin? And of course, the usual way that you begin is that somebody introduces you. And Suxiang is supposed to introduce me. Suxiang, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I can introduce you, but are we going to start now?
Yes, it's time to start. Yeah.
Okay. I actually don't have your introduction. I mean, your personal introduction. I only know you are going to talk about Vygotsky's teaching about emotions and what it means for completing his pedagogy. I hope my pronunciation is correct.
Oh, pedology.
Pedology. Okay, thank you. Over to you, David.
Okay, it's a very good introduction.
No, but in Russian, it is pedologia. So you are right.
I will use your Russian later on.
Okay.
Because my Russian sounds terrible. I was trying to speak Spanish and Portuguese in the breakout.
Oh, David.
And they just laughed.
People don't trust him. His Russian is excellent.
Anyway, Suxiang left out one thing, and that's that I'm a linguist. I don't fall into any of the three camps that that Nikolai outlined for us, although I would say I'm at the extreme opposite end from activity theory because I'm a linguist. And the important thing you need to know about me is not that I'm chat or that I'm cultural historical, but that I'm a linguist. And in particular, I'm a Hallidaean. And Halliday is a particularly strong branch of linguistics in Australia.
Yeah.
Let me use linguistics to try to make the most difficult part of my talk easy at the very outset. I want you to imagine that you're somewhere in Northern Australia and you're looking at a cliff. Sorry, Veronica, what is this cliff that we're looking at? It's
I've just come back from the Pilbara.
The Pilbara.
And which is the Northern Australia, very, very hot, red dust ground. And to me, it looks like the giant rock formations that you see when you're driving around. That was just my very first impression. So I hope I'm looking at the right thing.
That's perfect. And what you see are strata and layers. Now, these layers I'm going to use as a metaphor for understanding language. But I want to point out that a really good metaphor is not just a metaphor. A really good metaphor is almost a unit of analysis because it's very often a small part of the thing you're trying to describe. So, for example, when Oedipus says a man goes on all fours in the morning and on two legs at noon and on three legs in the evening, what you have is the metaphor, a day is a life. And well, a day is not a life, but a day is part of a life. And I'm going to suggest that the metaphor of strata works a little bit like that, okay? That what we're looking at is time, and we're looking at layers that are deposited in time. And those layers go something like this: mineral, rock; vegetable, ancient plants that have turned into coal seams; and finally, you and me, we are the last layer. The Anthropocene, the human layer, is the top layer. Now, I give this to you as a model of language. I say to you that language can be thought of as a hamburger, can be thought of as a sandwich, can be thought of as bread, meat, bread, or it can be thought of as lines on a cliff. Why? Well, because the top layer is bodies of people, bodies of human beings. And by that, I mean social and cultural bodies, nations, cities, speech communities, classrooms, which many of you are studying, and families, and also individuals. So bodies of people. And that's the context. That is the cultural historical bit. And we can divide them into context of culture and context of situation. We can go from, the climate that is created by the context of culture to the very specific situation that's created by the four walls of your classroom or the four walls of your family home. But they're all bodies of people. And then these bodies of people select certain things which they encode as meanings. And that's the semantics of language. That is where you get your feelings and your thoughts. And that's the layer that the first layer that Vygotsky's talking about when he says myślenia, thinking and speech. Now, below that layer is the layer that Nikolai likes to call speech and I like to call language. I like to call it language because I recognize there are really two layers there, okay? And the bottom layer is sound, and that sound layer also interfaces with the body. Why? Well, because your body has arms and hands and fingers for writing, and your body has lungs and larynx and tongue and lips for speaking. And that speaking, that speech, is the bit that Nikolai always refers to, speech. That's the bottom layer. That's the bread that interfaces with the material world. But in between meanings and soundings, there's something I want to call wordings. Wordings are lexicogrammar, not vocabulary plus grammar, because to me, it is all one continuum. On one end, you've got whole sentences. On the other end, you have single words. But in between, there are phrases, clauses, and terms, and all kinds of stuff. And really, vocabulary is kind of it's the word's eye view of the clause. And grammar is just the clause eye view of the word. So to me, that's the middle bit. That's wordings. I want you to think of it as a sandwich or as strata on the cliff, because in fact it is. Because in fact, these are layers that have been laid down in the process of child development, just like the layers that you see laid down in the Australian cliffs. Now, I hope that I haven't made things more difficult for you. Just think of it as being meaning, wording, sounding, where the ing suggests a process. And it also suggests something else. It suggests that each layer is linked to the other layers, as well as distinct from them. There's a bit that repeats, as well as a bit that varies. So meaning, wording, sounding. That's the sandwich we need to worry about. And I want to use this sandwich of context of culture and situation, meaning, wording, sounding, and then the human body, your body, my body, the individual body, with its arms and its hands and its fingers for writing, and its lungs and its larynx and its tongue and lips for speaking. I want to use that sandwich as a way of working you through some pretty hard concepts in philosophy. I'm going back before Hegel. I'm going back to the prehistory of Hegel. I'm going back to Spinoza. And I'm doing that because, not just because Isabel is interested in Spinoza. Isabel, I am interested in Spinoza too. It's not just because I'm just discovering some of this stuff for the first time, but also because Vygotsky is very big on Spinoza. Vygotsky's sister did her candidat, her thesis, on Spinoza. And Vygotsky's a young man sharing an apartment in the big city of Moscow for the first time. And there are theaters, and it's exciting. There's going to be a revolution. And here's Vygotsky living with his sister. And what's his sister talking about? From morning until night, it's Spinoza, Spinoza, Spinoza. So we can say that Spinoza has a big effect on Vygotsky. And sure enough, when you know where to look, you will find your Spinoza in the writing of Vygotsky. But here's the problem. Spinoza's hard. And Su-Xiang and I were working through some problems of dialectics in the chat box, passing notes while the teacher talked. And one of the things Su-Xiang keeps doing, Su-Xiang, there's a difference between 方言and 辩证法 in Chinese. 辩证法 is dialectics. 方言 is dialect.
Yes, yes.
Two very different concepts. And so, and one of the things that kept happening when I was talking to Su Xiang about dialectics was I kept wanting her to give me the next step of the dialectic when a child is trying to face the contradiction of making lots of noise and nobody does anything. Why? And I want, Su Xiang to give me the next step. And instead, Su Xiang gives me an abstraction. She says things like, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or she says something like, is the social situation of development a dialectic or whatever? And that's fine. You're rising to the abstract. But when you're doing research, when you're analyzing data, the task is to rise to the concrete. That's the problem. And this is why, everybody, I'm starting out with something a little bit abstract. If you can survive the next 5-10 minutes, you're home free. Okay, 6 Spinozian, though not entirely Spinozist propositions. Because when we look at Vygotsky's notebooks, we notice that Vygotsky keeps saying, I'm a Spinozian, but I'm not a Spinozist. Now, what does he mean by that? I was confused by this until I heard people in Geneva and in Paris, especially, where the late, great Lucien Sèvres just died of COVID-19 in March. He was a great man, great Marxist. His wife was the translator of Vygotsky into French. And he calls himself a Marxian, but not a Marxist. So there's something in there about, well, here's what Vygotsky says. Vygotsky says, just as light shows us both itself and darkness, truth, and he means a true proof shows us what is true, and also, by comparison, it shows us what is false. Okay? And so Vygotsky says this about Spinoza. Spinoza shows us what is true in himself. And there's a lot that's true. But Spinoza himself shows us what is false in Spinoza. And that's what Vygotsky means. When you are a Marxian, you use Marx not just to see what is true in Marx, but to see what is false in Marx. And when you are a Spinozian, you use Spinoza not just to see what is true in Spinoza, but also to see what is false in Spinoza. Well, all of these 6 propositions that I want to start with are elaborations of one great idea. And that one great idea is we live in one world, not 2. Now, it gets difficult because as soon as you say there's only one world out there, not 2, you end up with the weird proposition that 1 + 1 = 1 and not 2. And this is very well expressed by Veronica when she says that, the physical child and the mental child are one child, not 2. You don't cut up the baby. No, sorry, it's not Veronica. I can't remember. Valerie, I think it was. Valerie, sorry. Valerie made this point when Nikolai was talking about developments, that mental development and physical development are one development. They're one process of development, not 2. That's Spinoza's great idea. 1 + 1 = 1, not 2. So the first way he expresses this great idea is Deus sive natura, the 3 words that put an end to medieval life, the Middle Ages, the 3 words that destroyed our medieval way of thinking and created the modern world as we know it. Deus sive natura, God, in other words, nature. God is not a man with a long white beard. God is only nature's idea of itself. Now, throughout history, God is how human beings have conceptualized their relationship to nature. They've always said, why does it rain? Why does the sun shine? Why do people live and die? Why do dynasties rise and fall? It must be God's will. God is how human beings have construed their relationship to nature. And that includes, by the way, their own nature, their own human nature, because although we spent a lot of time using the word natural and artificial in kind of 18th century ways, humans are part of nature. Humans have a nature. And for most of human history, that has been conceived of as being kind of like a soul, sort of eternal. Now, when I say that God is nature's idea of itself, i.e., you human beings, because you are the most conscious part of nature, you and me, we are God, because we are nature's idea of itself. When I say that, I'm being Spinozian, because Spinoza never said that. But he did say Deus sive natura, that he said. But he couldn't say that, because when people say that, they were literally torn limb from limb by mobs in Amsterdam in the 17th century. So he couldn't say it. But I think it is very Spinoza. I think the idea that God represents culture, represents history, represents human consciousness of nature is a very Spinozian idea. So that's the first proposition. Deus sive natura, God is nature's idea of itself. Human beings are the most conscious part of nature. And for most of their history, they call it God. That's the first proposition. Now, the second proposition is that the object of the idea constituting a human mind is the body, or some mode of extension that the body perceives, something that actually exists, and nothing else. That the object of our minds is our own bodies and the bodies outside that our bodies look at. And I want you to think of my strata when you think of this. Think of how meanings are united to bodies of people. Meanings are united to nations, to cities, to speech communities, to families. That's why these are contexts, because they generate meanings, okay? And those meanings are the objects of our ideas. That's proposition 2. That is Spinozist, not just Spinozian. And you can find it in the Ethics. People, whenever a Spinozan or a Spinozian or a Spinozist says 11P number, what that means is look in the copy of the Ethics by Spinoza, his last great book. Look in chapter 2, and it's proposition 13. Meanings are united to bodies of people. The object of the idea constituting the mind is just the body, or all the things that the body sees, all the extension that the body measures, and all the things that actually exist. Nothing else, nothing else, no immortal soul, just a mind perceiving a world. Proposition 3, the idea of the mind is united to the mind in the same way as the mind is united to the body. Bodies are united to meanings. Sure they are. Of course they are. It takes a body to mean something. Bodies are united to meanings, and they're united to meanings in much the same way as meanings are united to wordings. If you go back to our sandwich, it should be clear. Bodies are realized as meanings. But meanings are realized, meanings, that is to say semantics, feelings, and thoughts, are realized as wordings, as vocabulary, and as grammar. And it doesn't stop there. The dialectic continues, because you see, wordings then have to be realized as soundings, as phonology, as phonetics, ways of saying, types of sounds. Nor does it stop there, because the dialectic always continues. The next step is your body, the articulators, the hands that write, the lips that speak. Okay? The idea of the mind is united to the mind in the same way as the mind is united to the body. Bodies are united to meanings, meanings to wordings, wordings to soundings, and soundings are produced by the body. That's proposition 3. Proposition 4. active emotions. And John was tweaking me about this one the other day. How do we know an emotion is active? John, do you know the answer? Spinoza says that an emotion is active if and only if all of the causes are in you. They have their efficient, and that means necessary and sufficient cause, in yourself. They are self-propelled. They are self-actuated. You only know meanings when you're a language teacher, if you're Isabella, if you're Melissa, if you're anybody in our summer school who's interested in language teaching. You know the difference between receptive vocabulary, productive vocabulary. And you know that they are not equal. You know that although when I say to Isabel and when I say to Caricier, go ahead, speak Spanish or Portuguese, and I will try very desperately to follow you. I'm using my receptive understanding of Spanish and Portuguese. And you know that when I try to speak Spanish and Portuguese, I sound like an idiot. So this means that every good teacher knows that you only really know meanings when you feel their necessity, when you think them out, when you put them in words, and when you sound or write them at will, when you want to, whenever you want to, when the necessary and sufficient cause of the language you're using is in you and nowhere else. That is an active emotion. And I want you to think of our sandwich. You have a meaning in your head, a feeling, a thought. You put it into vocabulary, you put it into grammar, and you are able to say it. And that ability tells you what an active emotion is. What is it not? Well, an active emotion is not a passion. And here in Korea, when you've given a really good class, everybody says, "Oh, you are so passionate," which in English means something rather sexual. It's not a good thing to say to a professor. But in Korean, it's very good. In Korean, it's actually, the other thing that Koreans say is that you are feverish, meaning you are hot. Nikolai is a very passionate and very feverish teacher. It's part of his charm and his appeal as a professor, and also part of the rough edges that you sometimes get when you have a question and you say, "Can I ask a question?" And Nikolai says, "No!" You could see that Nikolai is being funny, he's being witty, he's being passionate. That's Nikolai. Now in Spinoza, passions are not so good. Passions get you into trouble. Passions are emotions that have their efficient, necessary, and sufficient cause in our environment. That's why they're called passions, because you are passive. That's why we say the passion of the Christ, because it's something he suffered passively. Passions are emotions that have their necessary and sufficient cause in our environment. But of course, we do not directly experience our environment. We experience it through our senses and through our cortexes, our brains. All things, as Andy would say, are 100% mediated, as well as 100% unmediated. Because you are experiencing your sensations in a relatively unmediated way, and you are experiencing the things that you sense in a relatively mediated way. Well, passions are a mixture of sensations produced in your body, by your body, as they're received in your mind, and actual events in the outside world. And because you are not in control of the outside world, sometimes passions get you in trouble. And Isabel knows this, Melissa knows this, the language teachers out there know it, because we know that receptive meanings are meanings you don't control. Receptive meanings are heard meanings, understood meanings, but you don't control them. They're not active. They're things you understand, but things you cannot always say or cannot say the way you wish. And so when we go back to our hamburger, we see that this hamburger implies top-down, meaning, wording, sounding, active participation in discourse, rather than the way you listen, which is sounding, wording, meaning, which is passive participation in discourse. And then finally, and this is the moment of hope, this is where Spinoza tells us that freedom is necessary. Not in the sense you think, not in the sense of I must be free. No, no, no. Freedom is the recognition that all things are necessary, that things are because they have to be that way. And this means that we all have to suffer a lot. But, and this is the moment of hope, Spinoza also teaches us that an idea that is a passion, one that you suffer, one that makes you suffer, can be converted into an idea that is an active emotion by transforming it from a simple idea, a representation of the outside world, into the idea of an idea, the idea of an idea, the concept of an idea. What is this? What else is this but Pirishvan, the central concept in Vygotsky's construction of the personality and of consciousness? And that's the 6 Spinozian propositions that I am going to put before you. And what I would like to do now, Suxiang, is to break out into breakout rooms of 4 people. You can set them up accidentally. I have no objections. And everybody, all groups should come up with 1 question. Now, don't worry about the way you ask questions. Just say, tell me more about X, and I will try. It doesn't have to be a yes/no question. It doesn't have to be a WH question. It can be a command, which is, tell me more about blah, blah, blah. Okay, Suxiang?
Yes, I'm going to break out. Okay. All right. Can you see the invitation now?
I can't, but other people probably can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Jump. Yes, that was good fun. Yes, I hope you all had a good time. Yeah, great. Now, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I don't know who was in which room. Suxiang, do you know who was in which room?
It's too much to tell. There's 20 people in all different combinations, David. Look, just while I can I make an apology to the people in my group? When the little warning come up to say you're going to be taken out of your room in 60 seconds, I did what you always do. You just click the dialogue box and, of course, cut my head off. I think other people did the same thing as well, Valerie.
Wondering, what?
Well, my dialogue box is in Korean, so I take even longer to read it. Anyway, I want to hear from all the groups, and I'm not sure how to call on them. So, Suxiang, can I just go? Let's hear from group 1 and let's hear from group 2 and so on and so forth. Is that okay? Will that work? Okay.
Vivo group 1, I think.
Yeah, okay.
It was Arthur, myself, Nushin, and hey, who was also in our group? Arthur, myself,
Valerie.
Nushin, Valerie, yeah, Valerie. Yep. So, and we have a question, and Arthur will put the question from breakout room 1.
Yeah. So in the breakout room 1, we were talking about the metaphor of word meaning, wording, sounding, and suddenly we were talking about sandwiches and different types of sandwiches. And I think I think what was also interesting is that how the interpretation of metaphors is important. We're talking about how that perhaps there's a need for us to that there's a need for us to guide to learn how to interpret the metaphors, right? That learning how to interpret the metaphors is important, and how that learning to interpret comes about maybe through listening to other people's understanding or expression of the metaphor. So for me, I think I learned about the metaphor by listening to Valerie's interpretation of the metaphor and to notions, and I kind of also have been trying to formulate my understanding of that metaphor. Yeah, I hope I got that correct, Nikolai.
Yeah.
Valerie?
I enjoyed our little group. We put the 5 minutes to good use, I thought. And Arthur had some really great provocations about, I guess the question for David was, how do I interpret the metaphor? And how do I learn about how other interpretations of the metaphor can happen? Well, that was just one of several really good thoughts from Arthur. And yeah, it was a good time.
Nushin? I was looking for you, Nushin, because I wanted to start with you. Nushin and I were talking yesterday about whether linguistics is a natural science or a social science. And Nushin said that she thought it was both. And of course, she's right. But I think she's kind of half right in the sense that 1 + 1 = 1. Because her explanation was that it's biological at the bottom. And that's true. Language is biological at the bottom. But it's also biological at the top in an interesting way. And that interesting way, I'm going to suggest, is social science. Because you see, nations, cities, communities, classrooms, families, of course, these are social institutions, but they're made up of human bodies. And in that sense, they're also biological. And this brings us to a question that Isbab raised yesterday that I want to kind of put at the heart of what we're doing. How do we build a psychology that is related to sociology in the same way that biology is related to chemistry and chemistry is related to physics? How do we build a social science that is really a natural science, but a science of human nature? That's kind of that was Ishrak's question yesterday, and it's a question I want to put at the heart of our deliberation. Sorry, Nushin, did you have a question?
No, not really. I think my comment is from someone that never come across with linguistic. So yeah, it was very natural and naive one. So
Naive.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Naive, sorry. Yeah, I have very diverse background. I have a Bachelor of Mathematics, and then I did Master of Environment, and then now Education, but linguistic is not something that I never touch.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
mathematics is the same problem. That is to say, is it a natural science or is it a social science? Well, there's nothing in nature that corresponds to 0 or negative numbers, So there's some social, and that's the problem. That's the problem that we're really tackling in this summer school. Why are you confused? Why are you overwhelmed? Why are you tired at the end of each day? Because you are trying to solve the most difficult problem in the history of science. You are trying to put psychology, sociology together so that psychology is the idea of the idea in the same way as chemistry is kind of an idea of physics. And biology is kind of an idea. Chemistry, but these are two general concepts. Save me, group 2. Save me. Group 2?
Group 2? Okay. Do you know the list? Or do you want
yes,
me to
we're
tell the
group
list?
2. So that was Ronnie, Sean, Veronica, and Julia. Ronnie, do you want to take over, or do you want me to try and summarize all the quite diverse ideas that came up?
I think you would do better than me, John.
One of the central dilemmas that we had was distinguishing between active and passive emotions as you've outlined them. And the reason I think that many of us had problems with that is the idea that we're shaped and shape our cultural and historical environment and practice. And in a sense, the idea of agency and to differentiate between active and passive seemed to be quite difficult. The other issue that was raised was thinking about contradictions and how they fit in with the kind of contradictions that arise within the kind of Spinozian idea of emotions and passions that we've laid out. So that was a very brief summary of quite a complex discussion.
And who else was in your group? It was
Ronnie, Veronica, Sean, and Julia.
Okay. Sean, you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Suppose in answer to John's question, which is essentially questioning the distinction, but Spinoza's distinction, not my distinction, Spinoza's distinction between active emotions and passions. Is it more difficult to understand than the difference between receptive and passive vocabulary? That is to say, receptive and active vocabulary. Receptive vocabulary meaning you understand it, but you can't use it. And active meaning you can use it and use it at will. When the opportunity comes up, you just use it.
Put in that way, no, I'd have no issue with that, but I don't know about the others in the group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's ask Veronica. Veronica, is it harder? Is the distinction between active and passive more difficult or less difficult to understand than the distinction between active vocabulary and passive vocabulary?
They're equivocating because we have two Veronicas.
Oh, sorry. Which Veronica is yours?
Hongzi, you take the.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think that this question was asked by another Veronica about passive and active. My question was about the agency in Parachibani. Yeah, but I think maybe you respond to Veronica's question about active and passive.
Wait a minute, Hongzhi, before I pick on Veronica, do you think the two questions are related? They're obviously related because you talked about them together in your group, but when you say the issue is agency, maybe that's the answer, no?
Yeah, I agree, because if they take some active actions in responding to the social situation, it could be taken or be viewed as their agency or demonstration of a person's agency. Yeah, but my question is, there's something I read this morning is sometimes our emotion is in unconscious mood. It's outside of our control. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, do we have agency over our emotional response? Maybe we don't have agency over or control our emotional response. But my understanding or my guess is, maybe wrong, is after we have a type of emotion in responding to, for example, a situation, and that could lead to our action, and that will, activate our agency? I'm not sure.
I think agency is always active, isn't it? Is there any such thing as passive agency? Isn't that kind of an oxymoron or a contradiction in terms?
Yeah, yes, agency is active. So it's come back to the question of passive or active. What if someone just didn't take any action? So it's a passive, no, it's also a type of agency if they decide, no, I'm not going to I'm not going to do anything. Is
and exactly the cause, the necessary and sufficient cause of not doing anything is in me, not in the environment. It's in me. Then I do have agency. Now, notice that right away Spinoza has saved us from behaviorism. The behaviorist would have to say, well, just watch them and see if they do anything. And if they do something, they're exhibiting agency. The Spinozian goes one step further and says, wait a minute, everybody's doing something all the time. The real question is, what is the necessary and sufficient cause? What is the adequate cause? If the adequate cause,
David, that brings us to something else we were talking about, which as maybe I've missed something in the presentation, and I am no expert on Spinoza. I've always loved his idea of the unity, which is what you presented first. But now that we're digging around in these principles, there's not quite enough here. It's, for me, as presented, it's as if we have missed out. How are these active emotions, how are they generated? For me, they were always shaped within and shaping culture. They have emerged historically, so that even these words, necessary and sufficient cause, which I understand a little bit from a philosophical perspective, for me, they can never completely be in ourselves as put there. There is somewhat missing in regard to shaping and shaped by environment culturally and historically. So these wonderful ideas that we've been learning about for these last few years kind of go out the window when I see that kind of statement. So I'm quite puzzled. And the idea of passions as emotions almost seems to be a category for some kind of crazy, uncontrollable self. I don't really understand the passions part. But anyway, maybe you can shed some light on, perhaps we're looking at it from a Spinozian, not a Spinozist perspective, and we're looking at the incompleteness of some of these principles as you've laid them out, and what might be added to them by the perspectives we've been learning about over the last couple of years. Thanks, David.
Okay. Well, first of all, I only laid out the principles that are going to be relevant, immediately relevant to my presentation of Vygotsky. And so you're right, I didn't try to lay out the whole system. However, Spinoza's system can be unfolded from a few very simple ideas. So take, for example, your first question, Veronica, related to Honger's question. How do we get all of these emotions? And how do we, once we have all the emotions, what sense does it make to divide them up into passions and active emotions? Spinoza's answer to that is actually there aren't that many. Descartes had a whole Linnaean classification of emotions, and Spinoza said, you know, I can do that too, and he includes dozens and dozens of them. But actually, there are only three. And I want you to think of this as a painter thinks of it. I want you to, because I want to talk a fair amount about painting later on. I want to talk about paintings. Think of them as being the three primary colors. Those emotions are joy, sadness, and desire. And in fact, you can almost say there are only two. There's joy and sadness, because desire has to do with your will or your tendency to want something that will cause you joy, and not sadness. So joy, sadness, desire, red, blue, and yellow. Those are the primary colors from which Spinoza is going to give us the whole emotional palette. Now, to make it even easier, what he says is that joy is simply the desire of the human being to move from a state of less ability to act to a state of more ability to act. That's all it is. Joy is itself the transition from a lesser state of potential to a higher state of potential. That's what joy is. Sadness is the reverse. Sadness is moving from a higher state of potential to a lower state of potential, a lower state of potential action. And desire is our essence. Desire is conatus, that is to say, the will to persevere in what you're doing. Now, at this point, Veronica and Hongzhi are getting quite philosophical. And I am not the theorist in this group. I am the data guy. And linguists do tend to be data guys. We tend to be very interested in data. So what I'm really trying to do here is not unfold the whole philosophical system, although it's great, you know, it's great stuff. We were talking in our group about Einstein, Einstein's death, and E equals mc squared, and is energy really the same thing as matter? Are the two sort of convertible into each other? All kinds of great stuff, all that's cool. But what I'm really interested in is this, the sandwich, the Australian sandwich, the thing that Arthur was talking about. I'm interested in meanings, wordings, and soundings. So what I want to know is, does Spinoza work for explaining this? For explaining, because if Spinoza does work for explaining this, we can take thinking and speech and rewrite it as feeling and speech. Now think about that for a minute. Think about the whole of thinking and speech as a theory of human emotion, as a theory of how feelings develop, not just thinkings. I mean, and I know English makes this big distinction between feeling and thinking. We say, how do you feel? But we say, what do you think? And it makes the one sound very rational and the other one sound very irrational. But that's just English. Other languages don't do this. And in fact, English doesn't even do it very consistently. If this sandwich works, and I think it does, we can rewrite thinking and speech as feeling and speech and come up with a whole theory of emotions. Now that sounds totally far-fetched. It sounds like a ridiculous pipe dream until you realize that that's what Vygotsky himself was doing. Because the longest single manuscript, unfinished manuscript, the great unfinished symphony that Vygotsky leaves us when he dies, is actually called Teaching About Emotions. Now, I don't recommend that anybody sits down and tries to read it in a single evening. It's pretty tough going. But the teaching about the emotions is more than it's as long as thinking and speech and then some. It doesn't get as far, and it is unfinished, just like Schubert's unfinished symphony, just like Mahler's last symphony. There's a big chunk missing. But armed with thinking and speech, and armed with some of the ideas that Nikolai has given us and that Andy has given us, I think this project is possible. So that's really the purpose of my trying to distill everything down to six little slogans. Now, a lot of what Veronica says can be handled quite simply by going back to my sandwich and saying that a body is not a body, it's bodies. And that corpora in Latin, whenever Spinoza says corpora, what he means is not simply your body, my body, bounded by the skin. What he means is bodies of people, and that bodies of people can also have meanings, and bodies of people can also have wordings, and bodies of people can also share soundings. Now, I've called this interpretation, this reading of Spinoza, I've called it Spinozian and not Spinozist, because actually it's clear that Spinoza is interested in medicine, and he is interested in what the human individual body can do. But he also says, man is a god to another man, and there is nothing more useful than living in societies and being mutually dependent on each other. Now, if there's nothing more useful than being mutually dependent on each other, and yet passions are bad because they come to you from outside, well, those two things are contradictory because other people are outside me. But suppose they're not. Suppose we imagine that Spinoza's real unit, when he says body, is not your body, my body, but corpora, some social body. then I think we have a Spinozian way forward. Then I think Spinoza's own text can answer a lot of Veronica's problems. Okay. Oh, Hongzhi, I didn't say anything about consciousness. And this is because Vygotsky warns us that conscious is a very slippery term. And that when people use the term conscious, they're very often unconscious of what they really mean. Like, you know, when you tie your shoe, are you conscious of the way you're tying it? Really? You know, for example, if I ask you, Hongzhi, when you tie your shoe, do you put the left over the right or the right over the left? Which do you do? You can't answer, can you?
Yeah, if it's a habit, form the habit is unconsciousness action.
Well,
but when I was learning how to tie a shoe, I think, yeah, I was conscious. Like my son now, he's learning how to tie his shoe. I think there are consciousness when he's saying, should I put this line first, up this one or below? Yeah, so it depends, I think.
Yeah, and so, and Vygotsky's point is that there isn't a wall between the unconscious and the conscious, or, you know, the conscious is this tip of the iceberg above that. No, I mean, even Freud knows that you can make the unconscious conscious. That's how he made all his money, making people's unconsciousness more conscious to them. So I think it's a slippery term and it's moving all over the place. And so the idea of unconscious emotion, when you say the words unconscious emotion, my answer is the same thing as when people said to Piaget, the child has unconscious thinking. What does that mean? In what senses? I mean, obviously, yes, the child is thinking something that is not as conscious as the way the adult thinks. That's certainly true. Or the child is conscious of different things than we are conscious of when we think. And I think you can say the same thing about unconscious emotion, that you have to ask yourself, well, I'm not unconscious of the whole thing. Some part of it I'm conscious of, obviously. And there's no such thing as a completely unconscious emotion. And so I think that I would say the term unconscious emotion is a slightly slippery one. Let's see, that was group 2, yes? 3. Who's group 3?
I think I was in 3.
Yes, and
what we talked about in group 3 was remarkably similar to what apparently took place in group 2. So I'll just make it a couple of things more specific. People were concerned about the difference between a passive and active emotion, particularly the relationship between an active emotion and action. Mm-hmm. And the question of the dreaded pseudo concept of agency arose. And can I just mention, this didn't come up in the group, I pressed the wrong button, but Spinoza made an important contribution to the concept of agency. People talk about agency as deciding and being able to do something. And one of the things that Spinoza was particularly at pains to point out was the need to control what one wants, to control one's desire. One is born with a set of desires, having a human body, and that can cause you to react and have emotions that are passive in the sense that you're not in control of them. And Spinoza spent his life subjecting what he wanted to do to his own control. So the second step in development of agency in a child is when the mother offers a reward to the child to get it to do something. The child can say no to that reward because they've reached the stage of development of their agency where they can decide not to follow their desire. And that, so Spinoza contributed a lot to that understanding of agency. But people, I think what you responded to with group 2 covered a lot of all the things we really discussed in group 3.
Well, does everyone else in group 2 agree? Is anyone else in group 2 want to add to that?
You mean group 3?
Sorry, group 3. Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Toko?
And Sharon and Brenton.
Yes.
I agree. Yeah, it's very much similar to group 2. So yeah, it's been covered to me. Thank you.
I agree.
Well, let me disagree then, so that Nikolai doesn't come in and say that we're all dead. Okay. My point of disagreement is that I think Andy is shooting a little bit too low when he says, when the child says no, which is the crisis at 3, that the child has already converted an idea into the idea of an idea. Okay, we are told in the pedology, because as soon as you start reading Spinoza, you think, that's where Vygotsky got a lot of these organizing principles for the pedology, not out of the extant child periodization schemes of his time, but from Spinoza. So when you're looking at the pedology, you see that the crisis at 3 is the crisis of no. No, I don't want your sweetie. No, I'm not going to go with you. No. The child learns to say no, and the child learns to differentiate no from what the child actually wants. But, and here's the problem, the child isn't able to actually make positive proposals out of that yet. And so what Vygotsky tells us is that the crisis at the period between the crisis at 1 and the crisis at 3 is a period where the child is internalizing something, but it's not perezhvanie. It is instead representations of the outside world. The time that the child begins to internalize perezhvanie is 7. And the reason is that perezhvanie has 2 poles, not 1. The environment is a pole, but the child can already internalize representations of the environment. The child can do that basically at 1 or 2 or 3, and can negate them at 3, which is, quite a trick when you think about it. The problem is that perezhvanie, the other pole of it, is the self. The child does not yet have a representation of myself. I mean, you can say the child has a certain representation of what the child's body is like, or what the child thinks he's Superman when he's playing, or something like that. But the idea of an I, the idea of a ya, the idea of an ego, is actually late arising. And I think in order to really control your emotions, in order to be able to convert a passion into an active emotion, you require the idea of a subject. And I would say that doesn't really arise until later. And I'm actually, a lot of my research has to do with how do children create fictional selves, invisible friends, the idea of a superhero or a fictional character. That's one of the major, and I'm of course, because I'm a linguist, I mostly look at linguistic cues. Okay, that was my disagreement. Andy, you want to answer that, or should I go on to group 4?
I didn't know that Spinoza had much to say about perezhvanie.
Well, that's a good answer, but I'm arguing that perezhvanie is the idea of the idea, and if that's true, then Spinoza has a great deal to say about perezhvanie. Let's see. Sushan, who's next?
Group 4, Ishraq, Isabella, Judy, and Leslie.
Okay. Ishraq, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great.
My first time to hear about all of this.
Okay.
So we were asking Isabella to explain for us, and she did her best. I was just wondering if emotion mean feeling, but it wasn't, and Isabella elaborate that for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we are talking about the active and passive emotion, and we are wondering how is that happen? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how is the emotion being active and passive in the same time? And we are discussing the example that you have just said about the vocabulary in linguistics, the receptive and receptive vocabulary. What else, girls? Tell us.
Isabel, can you help?
Yeah, when we were talking about active and passive,
I was also trying to think and trying to explain. Something that I've studied, that being like the adequate, how do you say in English? Adequate cause has also something to do with understanding the causal chain of an emotion. Mm-hmm. So not just feeling, but also like if in an unit, understanding the cause of this feeling. Mm-hmm. And then our time was done, but I was trying to talk about this.
Okay, first of all, Isabel is a Spinozist. Or maybe a Spinozian, but she's obviously a Spinoza scholar, somebody who's read and thought deeply about Spinoza. And I am new to this, so I was very appreciative of Isabel's communications on Spinoza yesterday over the chat machine. But Ishraq is a Muslim, right, Ishraq? Yeah, and to me, and also to Spinoza, Islam is the most monotheistic of religions. And so of all the, Spinoza would call them superstitions, but of all the organized religions, Spinoza would say that this is the closest to one world. And he does talk about Islam. For the
Actually, most part, when they are speaking, I remember a lot of hadith that we are having in Islam, but I said, better to stop talking about this. We have a belief that God have us, the soul of us, it's from God. Yes. So we are one identity. Yes. And when the children come to this world and they live in different kind of families, Jewish or Christian or Muslim, so they put their culture and input on that child. Yes. So when you are talking about this, all this kind of like conflict come to me, like how it is very similar to what he is trying to express.
And to me, Ishraq, because I did spend 2 years of my life studying Arabic, and I did read the Quran, and in Arabic. I have completely forgotten, but the thing that impressed me reading Spinoza is how deep, that it is sort of deeply, deeply one-worldist. Mm-hmm. And so I think that Isabel and Ishraq, although bringing different things to the problem of Spinoza, are interestingly complementary. Now, I want to make two other comments. My first one has to do with emotion versus feeling. The nomenclature of emotion versus feeling comes to us from Damasio. And Damasio is a Spinozist. Damasio is very interested in Spinoza. He's written 3 books, Descartes' Error, and Looking for Spinoza, and even his first book, whose title escapes me right at the moment, is deeply Spinozian. But he lacks the cultural historical view to really turn Spinoza into a theory of psychology that is based on a theory of sociology. And you see this right away when you look at his distinction between emotion, which he associates with the body, and then feeling, which is how you respond to it in your mind. Without some way of bringing those two things together, of integrating them externally in bodies of people around you, I think you are going eventually to find yourself with Descartes and not with Spinoza. And so this is one reason why I wanted to start out with the language problem, the problem of language. The last point I want to make, before I call on Andy again, because I see Andy's got something to say. The last point I want to make has to do with the chain of causation. Spinoza's point is that cause has another cause. And that cause has another cause. And there's a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause. That the chain of causation is absolutely infinite. There is no such thing as an Aristotelian final cause. And this is why, Ashraf, people say Spinoza was an atheist and did not believe in God at all, because there's nothing causing the whole chain of causes. And by the way, it is part of the falsity of Spinoza that he believes that there was no Big Bang, there was no beginning. It's just causes of causes of causes that go all the way back. So the idea that a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause, that is what gives you the problem of passions, because you don't know what's causing your love or your hate or your emotion. You don't know, because, okay, you think it's some other person, but maybe it's not some other person. Maybe it's that other person's mother or something else, something, there's some cause of your cause of your cause. And the further away you go from your own self-caused emotions, the less you are in control and the more you will suffer. That's the idea. Now, so I want to now rise a little bit to the concrete, because we've got so many good language teachers here. I think we all know that when you walk into a classroom and you ask a yes/no question, you will just get yes or no and nothing else. Very often, this is particularly true of children. If you ask a WH question, like what, where, who, why, how, when, you get something a little bit longer. You ask the what question, you get lots of nice nouns. You ask the who question, you get personal pronouns. You ask when, you get these nice prepositional phrases about time expressions. And you can ask where and get prepositions of place and so on and so forth. So good teachers know this. They know that you can get a long answer or a short answer, and you can even control the kind of answer by controlling the WH word you use. But they also know this, that if you really want children to just let go, to be really active, to be in control and to use language at will, there are two kinds of questions you can ask. One is just, tell me about it. Tell me about proposition 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, anything. And you very often do this at the beginning of a classroom just to find out what the kids know, okay? But if you want the cause of a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause, if you want an infinite chain of complex grammar using because, as a result, therefore, and then, if you want a logical chain of things, there's only one question the good teacher asks. And that question is, why? That why question, the cause of the cause of the cause of the cause of the cause. Piaget is very annoyed with this question. He says that children go through a period around about 7 years old, he says, where, Mommy, why do we have to eat lunch? Because we're hungry. Why are we hungry? Well, because we need food. Why do we need food? Blah, blah, blah. And Piaget says this is really n'importe quoi. It's just n'importe quoi. It means anything at all. And the child is just giving you a twist and pulling your leg and having you on. I think Vygotsky is a little more thoughtful than that. Vygotsky says, well, maybe there is some empty verbalism here. But the interesting thing is, this is age-related. The question, what's this? What's that? What do you call this? What do you call that? That seems to be an earlier question. But the question, why? We see this in older children, 6, 7 years old sometimes. Interesting, very interesting. And I think if you are a Vygotskian, you are much less likely to be ill-tempered and impatient with that kind of question. Sorry, Andy, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Suxiang, who's next? I've lost track.
Next is Judy.
Okay. Judy, are you there? Judy?
I was in the group with Isabella and Eshraq and Leslie. So we've already spoken.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Who's next?
Room 5 and Room 5, Andrea, Brandon, and Megan.
Brandon, do you want to have a go trying to summarize our conversation? Other than the first thing was that we had challenges getting Andrea to participate because due to low bandwidth.
Oh, dear. No, that's too bad.
Brendan, over to you.
Yeah, just because I've been taking little screenshots here, putting them together for my own interest. So I was comparing the 6 Spinozian propositions to your title about the lenses, and just that was what I'm interested. So if I have a question, is how do they relate?
Okay. Well, at the very beginning of this class, I said that I proposed a joke that we all take a drink of something whenever you hear somebody use lens. And it was partly a serious joke. I think very often, I don't know about you, but very often when a theory is very difficult for me to grasp, I begin with a metaphor. I don't have a very theoretical mind. I was trained as a painter. Painters tend to see things in images, but images that stand for other things. So I tend to, first of all, visualize things a lot. And secondly, think about the ideas that stand behind the visual image. Now, lens is an interesting metaphor, but it's a problematic one. And already I hear lots of people saying things like, well, I want to use Vygotsky as a lens in order to better wield the tool of activity theory in order to build my PhD thesis. Now you can see that when a student says that, the metaphors have lost their quality. The lens has become foggy. The lens and the tool has become blunt. Because if the lens were clear and if the tool were sharp, then you wouldn't have these mixed metaphors. You would have a single use of the metaphor. So I'm trying to give you metaphors that to me are single use in some way. Now, and very often I find that these metaphors are not really metaphors, Brandon. So I started out by saying that I thought that when you say life is a day, it's a metaphor, but it's also a metonym, a part-whole relationship, as well as whole stands for whole. So yeah, a day stands for a life. You know, a day stands for a life. It represents a life. But also a day is part of a life. And in the same way, I'm going to argue that the strata of language, the sandwich that Arthur was making fun of, the sandwich is put together by human beings, just like word meaning is. The sandwich is a whole made up of 3 distinct parts. And the sandwich is a word. It's a word, and therefore it's part of a language. And so I like to think of how metaphors are actually parts of the things they represent. And here's the thing about Spinoza. What was his job? Well, I'll tell you, he was a lens grinder. That's what killed him. He died when he was in his early 40s. And he died from inhaling powdered glass from grinding lenses. And he made some great lenses. He was very well known for the eyeglasses he made, but he was also making lenses for telescopes and for microscopes. And in fact, after he died, Christian Huygens and his brother Constantine Huygens, who were the 2 foremost astronomers of Holland during the day. I think our recent probe landing on Saturn is called the Huygens probe for that reason. They bought Spinoza's machinery and continued to grind lenses using it. And so Spinoza was a lens grinder. And also we are working on we're working on a translation into Korean of Vygotsky's wonderful and frustrating and annoying and irritating and provoking teaching about the emotions. And what I'm trying to do in this book is turn it into 2 books, very un-Spinozan. On the one hand, Vygotsky's translation of Vygotsky's Russian into Korean. And on the other, a kind of graphic novel where every paragraph, one of our group of teachers has a question, some strange question to do with what they've just read. And what I do is I go and I get a beautiful Dutch picture, beautiful Dutch painting, and I put the question in there. And then we try to write the caption, the answer to the question. So it's turning into kind of a graphic novel, almost a comic book, because it's got all these crazy pictures in it. You know, this is a Rembrandt, and this one is a very little known painter called Paulus Bohr. And this is a wonderful Rembrandt etching, and you will never guess what it's about. It's about the Good Samaritan, and it's, in that sense, it's really about the ethics and about the emotions. But everybody who looks at it thinks it's about a dog taking a crap in the foreground. And so we're having a good time with this. And every once in a while, we realize that because Dutch painting was the first truly realistic painting. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let me not just talk about it. Because Dutch painting was the first realistic in the modern sense painting, what we have is almost a lens through which we can see the world that Spinoza saw. You know, the trees that he saw that were outside his home, the kinds of paintings that he saw. We can start for the first time to see what everyday life was like in Spinoza's time. Now, so what? So as we've been learning in the summer school, ideas make sense in a particular historical context. When I work with Nikolai, I like to think that if we just read everything that Vygotsky read, we will somehow be able to think whatever Vygotsky thought. And of course, that's not true. Even if it were possible to read everything that Vygotsky read, we could never hear what Vygotsky heard or see what Vygotsky saw. And yet, with the help of what Spinoza would call imagination, and by the way, he likes imagination, but it's a very low form of knowledge. We should be able to reconstruct the bodies of people, the nation, the city, the community, the classroom, the family of the world of Spinoza and the world of Vygotsky. And this should be part of our ability to understand these texts and to adapt them to our own nations, our own cities, our own communities, our own classrooms, and our own families. Suxian, is there anyone else out there?
Now we are going to have room 6 and room 7 is our group. So
okay, great.
So room 6 is Melissa, Shiyama, and Felicia.
Yeah, it's possible that you've already kind of answered our question, David. We were talking about your last point there about passion being converted into an active emotion and how that was perejivanie. And you talked about that a bit, about perejivanie being the idea of the idea. So that process is perejivanie, and also that you require a representation of the self, and that's part of perejivanie as well, as far as I understand it. So I think you've kind of, I'm not sure what the other members of my group think, but that's that helped me to understand that point a bit more.
Okay, yeah, no, that's, you put my words into better words than I put them into. Let's see. Okay, anyone else from that group got anything to add? Okay, then Suxiang, the last group.
The
That's
last
you,
group. Yes.
Tell us about
it was quite interesting when we are talking about feelings and emotions. And in the beginning, when I was listening to your speech, I felt overwhelmed and my brain went blank. So when I entered the group and you asked me, like, do you have a question? I have no question because my brain was blank. So I guess in that sense, feelings is related with thinking. And then I think it's quite interesting that you asked me to ask Jessica a question about Einstein at that point, and I was like a little bit surprised. And I asked Jessica the question, and she tells us something about she told us something about Einstein. And then when she ended up saying, like, someone asked Einstein, did he believe in God? And then you asked me another question about, do you think Spinoza believed in God? And at that point, before, I thought my brain was blank, but when you asked me the question, suddenly I could record a sentence you talked about in the speech. So I think it's quite interesting. It's just an interesting experience for me. And then after that, after I tried to explain it, it seems that my thinking becomes clearer, and I started to understand what you were meaning in your speech a little bit more. And just now, when you are talking about imagination, that's another point that resonates, like I resonate with, because I remember when I was really young, I've never been abroad. So I was in China, but I really enjoy reading novels, like novels written by foreign writers. And I could imagine and reconstruct the villages, the people, the life of the 18th centuries in my mind. And I think like it's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm not so sure whether I'm making myself clear or not.
Very clear, Su-Xiang. Very clear. Yes, I think that actually Su-Xiang is bringing up another point about how the idea of the idea becomes perejvani. And that was the main thing that Andy was skeptical about. And also, to tell you the truth, I'm not entirely sure myself about it. Let me just see if Jessica is out there. Jessica,
it's okay. For me, something important in the group was this notion about patterns that you have been digging during this previous talk about the cause of the cause of the cause. How important is for us building this deep notion of understanding the world and understanding ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
we didn't even get to the anecdote about Einstein. What I got out of it was this. I got out of it that very often, if you ask a very concrete question, like, tell me about Einstein. Did Einstein believe in Spinoza? Did Einstein believe in God? And did Spinoza believe in God? When you ask very concrete questions like this, you get answers, but they're not usually the answers you want. Now, actually, it was the last question, the question of whether Spinoza believed in God, that got me a really interesting answer, because Su-Xiang said that it depends entirely on what you mean by God. That's the whole key. And since we don't really know what Spinoza meant by God, he wasn't free to tell us, because it was a time when if you didn't believe in God, you were torn limb from limb. Because we don't know this, that gives us a certain freedom. It gives us an ability to reach back into Spinoza and say, perhaps what he meant by God is nature's consciousness of itself, the conscious principle in nature. But that's me, that's you. That is human beings in their history, in their society, in their culture. That's God. Maybe it isn't what Spinoza meant, perhaps not, but for that reason, I think Vygotsky called it Spinozian. Okay, John, are you there? Okay, since John
turn my microphone on. Yep.
Okay, what do you think? Should I sail on, or shall we break for a while, or what?
I think sail on.
Okay, here is the official beginning of what I was going to say. It's rock, paper, scissors. I want to, like I said, I think that one of the things that makes our summer school exhausting is not so much the intensity of the presentations, or even, the size of the problems we're tackling, because if you are a real teacher of children, you believe that no matter what size, there is a way to teach, no matter what problem, in some truthful way. I think that very often there's a lack of overlap between presentations. And so I'm going to try to remedy that by overlapping. And I'm going to start with Nikolai's problem. And I'm going to use that as my rock. And then I'm going to take two suggestions from Ishaq. And I'm going to use that as paper and scissors. And I want you to see how these questions answer each other in quite a dialectical way. So Nikolai's problem is this. Let's use the ZPD concept to explain how the development of higher psychological functions is not only social, but also mediated. Ishaq's suggestions are, let's analyze data instead of just sharing research topics and talking theory. But she also says, let's discuss how to build psychology onto sociology in the same way that, say, chemistry has been built onto physics, biology onto chemistry. You notice that in the social sciences, what happens is some great man social scientist appears and creates some great man vocabulary for talking about a particular problem. And then his students say, nah, that's not it. And they invent some new great man with some new vocabulary. And what you get is a kind of linear development of sociology and social theory. Whereas, since the time of Spinoza, the natural sciences have taken a somewhat different course. There is mathematics, which everybody agrees on. You cannot be a natural scientist unless you know some math. And then on that, there's physics. And even if you are not a physicist, you have to agree to certain physical principles. That's how the game's played. And on top of physics, we have chemistry. Chemistry, in theory, you could reduce it to physics, just as you can reduce physics to mathematics. It won't do you much good, but you can. That seems to be a much more constructive way of building a science. And so one of the questions we have is, can we build a psychology that is built on sociology in much the same way that, I don't know, biology is built on chemistry, chemistry is built on physics, physics itself is built on mathematics. Now, on the face of it, these two suggestions from Ishraq are completely contradictory. Paper, that is to say Nikolai's problem, says, Ishraq's first suggestion says, let's analyze the data. Let's not share research topics. Let's not talk theory. But scissors, that is to say Ishraq's second suggestion, is really a meta-scientific question. It means we cannot answer this question by analyzing data. We can only answer it with theory. Well, I want to put it to you that because of dialectics, sometimes questions, when they're posed at this level, are kind of like a game of rock, paper, scissors. We can use the ZPD concept to analyze data, and we can use the speech analysis into units that I want to show you, to show how to build psychology onto sociology and linguistics onto psychology. And we can use this new kind of top-down way of building things, not from biology upwards, but from the top down. Ideology downwards, or semantics downwards, or semiology downwards, in order to explain the development of higher psychological functions, not only socially, but also mediated. Because I put it to you that the real way in which the development of the higher psychological functions is mediated is semiological, and semiological is semantically through meaning, and systemically through systems of choices of meanings. And all of that is much better said in Russian, or rather, I should say the key to it is said in Russian. Nikolai, can you say this in Russian for me? My pronunciation is terrible. Наличение аффективных. Nikolai? All right, I'll give it a try. Nikolai doesn't want to do it either. Наличение аффективных повышений непременный спутник, когда, and I want you to listen to the word sputnik. Sputnik, когда
David, okay. Translation is absolutely correct. Just focus on the translation.
Well, but I want the word Sputnik.
Sputnik is a satellite, okay.
Sputnik is a satellite, and everybody says this. Everybody says Sputnik is a satellite. Actually, our children will all say Sputnik is a vaccine. But actually, it's neither one. It's not a vaccine, and it's not a satellite, because, of course, this is long before the Soviet Union launched Sputnik satellites.
Yeah.
See, that's the problem. So what is the word Sputnik here? What does it mean?
Any ideas? Let's ask people, David.
Well, actually, what I was going to ask was John. John, are we supposed to take a break or not?
We had a break with the breakout room. I think we can run through to the end.
Okay, great. Except that I would like, okay, all right. I would like everybody to take 3 minutes in the breakout room and come up with a correct English translation of the word Sputnik. And I'll give you a hint. It's not a vaccine and it's not a satellite.
Yep.
Sushan, can we break out?
Oh, actually, it is a vaccine. It is a satellite, but in this quotation, it is not a vaccine. It is not a satellite.
Right. Yes.
Please be exact. You are a linguist, David.
I will try to use the previous rooms so people are familiar with each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what did you agree? What was the translation?
We came up with the word trajectory or path.
That's what I like about Brandon. He's always first with the wrong answer.
You fell into Nikolai's trap, Brandon. You fell into the trap. It definitely does not mean trajectory. I'll tell Nikolai that and he'll freak out. Okay. Okay. Megan, which group were you? Were you group 1?
Group 5.
Group 5 was back first with the wrong answer. So group 5 says it means the word trajectory. Now, my group, Suxiang, which number is my group?
7.
Okay, we've got Jessica, and Jessica has fingers, the only person I've ever seen who has fingers for Googling even faster than my students' fingers for Googling. So she came up with traveling companion, which is Google's answer. It's Google's answer. And it's a little problematic because what Vygotsky says is from the very beginning of child development to the very end of child development. Interesting. Group 1.
Yeah, we were very lucky in group 1 because we had, sorry, Nikolai, go on.
Yeah, okay.
We had Nikolai, so we didn't even attempt to guess. Nikolai told us straight away. So he break the word in. Please correct me. I cannot remember. It's Putnik means road, and the S at the beginning means someone who accompany you on the road. So it's someone that always accompany you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the whole story is that the word Sputnik was the word which existed in Russian language long before the first Sputnik was sent around the Earth in 1959. So it's a very old Russian word, and it was in use before vaccine and before satellite, the first satellite. So, and if you look on the structure of the world, using linguistic approach, if David doesn't mind. So, first Sputnik. First is the put. Put is a road or way or path. Putnik is somebody who takes this path, who goes. Okay, and Sputnik is somebody else who is also going on this path together with Sputnik. S means co. Okay, if Sputnik is a traveler, Sputnik is a co-traveler, so to say.
Yeah.
This is what we hope that this is what Vygotsky actually means by using the word Sputnik, inseparable Sputnik, in every stage of development, from the very beginning of put to the very end of this put. Okay.
And let me just...
Nikolai, can I ask something?
Yeah.
And how do you say in Russian, like the satellite, not the Sputnik satellite, but like the natural satellites, like the moon?
Yeah, but why the moon in Russian is also Sputnik? Because the Earth goes its way, and moon always accompanies the Earth in its way across the space, across the universe. That's why moon is called natural Sputnik of Earth. And that's why all space shuttles are artificial Sputniks, because every space shuttle, if it's not coming to the other planet, they have a trajectory, orbit around the Earth. They are becoming also Sputniks of the Earth, because they are not only moving across the Earth, they are traveling across the universe together with Earth, because Earth also moves around the sun, and sun also moves. So, but moon does not accompany directly the sun, it accompanies the Earth. That's why it's called Sputnik. Using very old Russian word, bringing new meaning to old Russian word Sputnik. And now we have the third meaning, which is vaccine.
Yes, right.
Okay. Sorry, it was a long lecture, but David, I think you enjoyed.
No. Let me take it to the next level. My next question is this traveling companion, is this companion circling around the child from the beginning of the journey to the end of the journey, is this companion a more knowledgeable other, or is it somehow a less knowledgeable other? Because in our group, when I put this question, it was first of all pointed out to me that what Vygotsky says is not that affect is the Sputnik. He doesn't say that. He says that affective motives are the Sputnik. Affective motivation and goals are the Sputnik that circle around the child as the child is going. So that was the first thing that was pointed out to me. And then Julie, are you there?
I think.
Okay.
Hi. Which
hi,
Julie,
yes,
Julia
hi.
or Julia? Julia, do you want?
I want Julie from my group, Julie West. Julie West?
Hi, Julie Wren.
Wren, I'm sorry, Julie Wren. Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, so the question is, emotion, is it more knowledgeable or less knowledgeable?
You want me to answer it?
Yeah, I actually, when you are answering questions like this and re-answering them and re-answering them, it's not cause of the cause, but it is formulation of an idea of the idea, because each time a really important idea gets formulated, it's hardly ever formulated in its complete form. And this question of whether the Sputnik is a more knowledgeable other or a less knowledgeable other turns out to have important ramifications for everything we do. And I thought Julie's answer was really good. Julie?
Emotion, I don't think, is either more or less than knowledge. And I think it's misleading to compare it with knowledge in that way, because it's quite different. To my understanding, knowledge is emotion, or the affective aspect of a human, is something that complements or coincides with the experiences that a person feels that accompany them right throughout life, from birth right through to adult life. Emotion is something that enhances what we come to understand about ourselves and our world. It contributes to our knowledge of ourselves and our world, as does knowledge contributes to emotion. So it's a two-way thing. So I don't think they're separate, but they do inform each other.
Okay, I was waiting for Julie to say the word inform, because the way she formulated it initially in our group was to say that emotion informs knowledge, which you can see that the word inform implies knowledge. And so emotion is, although she's trying to express the idea that emotion is not more knowledgeable or less knowledgeable than knowledge, because the way our language is formed, the way it comes out, and this is why Nikolai spent so much time on I wouldn't call Nikolai's intervention about Sputnik linguistic, because to me, linguistics is much more top-down. I would call it philological. And actually, Vygotsky was not a trained linguist. He was a philologist. He studied philology and the tradition in Russia. And this is why we need some supplementation when we're working with Vygotsky's linguistics, is highly philological. It's very interested in the love of words and the study of individual words. And you can see a lot of this. You can see a lot of this in the fights that Nikolai and I get into over translation. You can see a lot of it in the point that I'm making right now about Julie's statement that emotion informs knowledge. Now, actually, Julie herself didn't use informs here, and I think there was a good reason for that. I think she realizes that as soon as you say that emotion informs knowledge, you are implying that emotion is somehow more knowledgeable than knowledge, whatever that would mean. Sushant, do we have anybody else to hear from?
Yes, we have 3 minutes left, but we have room 2, 3, 4, and 6. Any one of the participants from these rooms would like to share their definitions.
Good.
Okay, well, I'm the spokesperson for group 3, so I'll go ahead. So we said that it was the companion that's showing the way or leading you forward in all of these steps. So we used a little bit of Google and a little bit of our own conversation, looking at the structure of the sentence to get there. But we did also use Google. So.
I'm from group 4. We were trying to remember what we'd read, and we did come up with the traveling companion, but we also, I was thinking about what I've learned about Russian words and how they're appropriate in different contexts. I wondered about the vaccine being protective, whether there was a protective angle to this.
Good. Yeah.
Group 2, we came up with hand in hand.
Oh, there's a good one. Hand in hand. Yeah. Okay. I think we can see from this that we've got a lot of problems that need to be solved, and that all of these problems, and this is both a strength and a weakness of the way we've run the summer school thus far, have to do with how do we take ideas that are general enough to include everybody, so that everybody's invited, no matter what you're doing, it's related to the particular topic that we're discussing in the summer school. And at the same time, concrete enough so that you know what to do with your data, you know how to analyze it, and you know how to come up with something concrete that you can make a PhD out of. I think this is the problem that keeps coming up again and again and again. And very often when people complain about the intensity or the exhaustion or the sheer tiredness of presentations, it's that problem that's really nagging them. What do I do with this? How does it all fit in with my project? Now, for the rest of the presentation, what I was going to do was to try to present to you the way I solved this problem. Now, the way I solved this problem is not going to fit everybody. So for example, Julie Walsh. Julie, you're a Julie too, right? Julie Walsh?
Julia.
Right, Julia Walsh is having some interesting problems with figuring out how cultural historical theory belongs to basketball and what you can do on the basketball court with it. And I was suggesting that although there is no universal unit of analysis that will fit any human activity, human beings themselves have evolved a system, kind of like a natural system, that allows us to analyze meaning. And that system is language. Language can be very misleading because, it can lead you off in the direction, which is the beginning of my own research, of studying language as a natural science, i.e. as sound waves. This is a sound wave of myself going, "Hi, I'm Dr. K. And you?" And the task I had given myself here was to try to discover where exactly, first of all, how many units are there in this? And secondly, where do I locate the emotion? I won't bore you with all of the wrong turns I took, the dead ends I followed, and the hopeless conclusions that I came up with. That is the story of 15, 20 years of fruitless work. But I will tell you this, that one of the things I did discover is that although there is no magical unit and no magical method, there is a traveling companion that will accompany every single PhD project that I've ever seen in cultural historical theory, anything to do with child development and anything to do with adults. And that is emotion. Emotion. The problem is that we haven't correctly worked out how exactly, we're pretty good on concept formation. We're pretty good on, things like complexes and things on mediated action and so on and so forth. We're not very good at understanding this traveling companion, this Sputnik that accompanies the child from the very beginning of the child's journey. Another metaphor, and a metaphor that we shouldn't give up, the child's journey from birth to adulthood. And I think, John, I have to end here, right? John?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. All right, I have to end here, people. Believe me, I had a ton of other stuff to say, just like Nikolai. And there is a PDF, there's a Word file that shows some of what I was going to talk about. And I'd be happy to answer questions either here at summer school or through the email. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, David, and thank you everyone for this wonderful session. We are going to have half an hour break from 3 to actually 27 minutes break till 3:30, and then we will come back at 3:30 p.m. for another session on theory into practice and practice into theory. And John, do you have anything to add before they go?
Just a couple of things. David's the presentation that he was working from, what you saw up in there, which he got through the first 3 pages of. The following 16 pages are up in his folder. So feel free to go and have a look at that and start to read through. And as you know, David is eminently approachable. The one-to-one consultations, which are going on tomorrow morning, and then also on Friday for 2 two-hour slots. Not all, but a significant number of the presenters have put themselves down there as available. They're in half-hour slots, and so it will be a first-come, first-served basis. I've put it as a Google Doc, and I will send out the link to that Google Doc after the final presentation today. So then you can go on, put your name down in spaces that you were in. There's nothing else happening at that time, so it's otherwise free time if you don't want to talk. The one-to-one consultations are really a chance to engage about a particular issue or particular ideas with particular presenters. Now, the only disadvantage is because we had to rearrange the program, certainly for the presenters, Nick Helpwood and Joss Nuttall, you won't have actually heard them until after you've nominated. You want to talk to them, but if you are interested in cultural historical activity theory, they are both eminent researchers there, and especially if you've got any interest in dual simulation, and they've been both working on that a great deal. So that will be released at 7:30. I'll send out an email to you. Check your email, go on to Google Docs, put your names down in the slots. Once there's somebody else's name there, you can't take that slot. Any questions? Okay, we'll see you back in now only 25 minutes time.